everyone. I'm Rachel Farrat, and this is the 64th and final episode of Elsie Cast, the fan podcast for people who love Elsie Fest. Ever since I announced that I'm ending the podcast, people have been asking me why. And I feel like if you've been around for the whole ride and you've retweeted or been on the podcast or listened or donated to the Indiegogo, then the least I can do is explain myself. Christine from the Darren Chris Army and I had this great plan where she would interview me, and it would be a lovely way to come full circle exactly 3 years after our first interview to end the podcast. We did that. It was glorious, and the sound quality was awful, and I could not do that to you. So I'm ending the podcast by reading you this essay I wrote instead, because you deserve closure. When I started this project, I had a lot of goals. Big ones, little ones. They ranged from the very actionable, like getting out of my comfort zone to meet new people, to the nearly impossible, becoming best friends with Darren Chris and having parties on the Glee couch in his house. I'm a ridiculously practical person, as is my husband, and I only started the podcast after he and I had lengthy conversations about those goals, which were likely attainable, and whether pursuit of only the most minor of them was worthwhile. Well, in the past 3 years, I've made 63 podcast episodes, learned how to use GarageBand and Skype, which is harder than you think when you put the two of them together, connected with strangers, celebrities, and old friends, developed a new hobby or 6, attended both Elsie Fest and BroadwayCon on my own, also a bigger deal than it sounds, made more new friends than I could name right now, raised money on Indiegogo, and established myself on Twitter as the default expert who will answer you anyway, about Elsie Fest. I think that was worth the work. Looking back over the past 3 years, I can honestly say I enjoyed every single interview. I have great pride in how far I've pushed myself, an essentially introverted person, to ask people for interviews when I was sure they would say no. Some of them even said yes. I made myself speak to strangers at BroadwayCon by bringing items to give away, and through the Make More Art project. I enjoyed most of those interactions too. Every 2 weeks, I forced through the inevitable anxiety that came up when I opened up Skype to speak with a stranger, and every single time, the result was a delightful conversation about something we both love. In a few special cases, the result was a genuine friendship. I treasure those cases the most. But when I start to look forward, I don't see many new challenges I want to face. There are parts of this project that bring me regular, unfettered joy. Giving away playbills, the Make More Art sticker project, hanging out with all of you on Twitter, designing and selling t-shirts when I move to do so, and those things will continue. But making the podcast has felt more and more like work, especially tracking down and scheduling possible guests. I have a kid who is turning 16 and has less time to hang out with her parents than she used to. Time I don't want to interrupt to go to an interview. At the same time, more and more podcasts about Broadway are springing up every day. Some are good, some are excellent, but there is less and less need for my voice in the podcast space. I feel less like I'm filling a hole now, and more like I'm competing for a limited resource with people who are more talented and dedicated than I am. In many ways, I have done what I set out to do. To continue growing as a podcaster, I would have to dedicate many more hours per week to the task than I am now. I'm just not interested enough to do that. Maybe in a few years when my kid is off at college, I'll revisit the idea. Who knows? Maybe a producer will appear in my life who is interested in elevating my voice to a different level, or maybe my interests will shift. The future is unwritten, but for now, it seems like it's time to end the podcast and move on to other things. Just as I was thinking these thoughts, my friends at Broadway Makers Alliance reached out looking for someone to write their newsletters and blog. It couldn't have been more perfect. I will continue to support people who make art and other things about Broadway. I'll get to express myself and be creative. I can probably even conduct an interview or two along the way. But I won't have to chase down content, write a schedule, or spend hours editing. The way I look at it, it's time to move on, and I'm getting the best of everything. So please, come find me next week at Elsie Fest, follow me on Twitter at ElsiePod, and let me know if you have some awesome stuff you want to give away. Now it's time to turn to the thank yous. First and foremost, thank you for listening. It has meant so much to know that my episodes weren't just going out into a void, but were going out to the ears of the greatest fans in the world. Elsie fans are, after all, the best fans. Thanks to everyone who supported the podcast financially, especially Marty Baldo, Ann Arbortees, Allison Stuller, Audrey Ostrick, Carol Lewis, Jason Milligan, Amy Yang, and my parents. Thanks also, of course, to Dan and the kid who have put up with a lot. You can get more information about Broadway Makers Alliance at broadwaymakers.com. More information on the Darren Criss Army can be found by following them on Twitter at Darren Army. Please also check out the campaign they're doing right now to buy Darren some celebratory cookies for Elsie Fest at The Criss Project. And that brings me to my final thank you. As always, I have to thank Darren Criss, Ricky Rollins, and Jordan Roth for creating Elsie Fest. Guys, please make more art. See you October 5th.